All right. We are live. So we were last week. We had discussed at the end. At the end, we were talking about smicha, not the kind that I got, but the kind that you put next to the oven. You were somech the pot next to, not in the heat source, not on top of the heat source, but next to the heat source. If you look conveniently at the that drawing, that the picture that Steve Keller sent out a few weeks back to the group, which was as a picture from his edition of the Mishnah Berurah, you saw a nice picture there where the pot is basically up against the oven. It's a somech lakira. That we had already last week discussed that by many is permitted outright, even on Shabbos, even in terms of a chazara. Certainly when it comes to shehiyah, there's no problem, so long as it's even just partially cooked, kamachal ben drusai, even if it's like minimally cooked, because again, there still is a prohibition of cooking. If somehow you can manage to cook from that spot, which I question whether or not you can truly cook from outside the oven, or you can really truly cook it, there's more reheating it. But in theory, you could go ahead and cook it. You can go ahead and have it there once it's even minimally cooked. Okay, so that was Sifkat on Tezvav. That was the last thing we did last week in the Mishnah Berurah. So we're up to Tez Zayin. The statement that the Mishnah Berurah is commenting on here is that it was okay lismoch la kedera v'samuch chutzala. You're allowed to again put the pot right outside the oven, right up against it. Tez Zayin, kedera. Kedera means a pot. Hainu gam kein afil lo nizbash l'shlish. Even if it's not even cooked, a third, it's fine. That's totally fine. Since you're just putting it on the outside. It's no worse than a situation where when you're garuf v'kotum, the oven, remember, just to review our terms here, garuf means to rake the coals. According to some, it was to rake it out of the oven altogether. Again, I only question whether that makes sense in the context of chazara. When we talk about Shabbos morning, how in the world could you have a warm oven if you've removed the coals before Shabbos? I don't understand how that could continue to be hot. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. I'm not saying this with any kind of arrogance. I'm humbled, I think, to know that I don't understand about that opinion. The opinion that makes a lot of sense to me is the Balamor's opinion about when you rake the coals, you're raking it to one side of the oven. Remember, they would go underneath the oven, you're raking it to one side. And when this was the reminder that in case where you were to stick that thing, I don't know what the word is again, I forgot, that to stoke the coals, the poker to stoke the coals, you'd realize, well, wait, it's not there, it's over there on the side, and that would be your reminder to stop you from this natural instinct that you have, which you do all the other days of the week, is to stoke the coals. We'll make the point shortly that how this relates to a gas oven when the knobs are so easily adjustable, and you do it all the time, right? You walk by your pot of soup. Let's go. Oh, I have to adjust it quickly. We are accustomed because of how we use our oven the other 6 days of the week. That's the fear that on the seventh day of the week on Shabbat we may make mistakes by accident with the heat source. So here he says, outside the oven, that's like garuf and katum. And if it's garuf and katum, you can have something that is not cooked at all on the heat source, cooking into Shabbos. So he says this is the same thing. Again, whether you can practically cook in such a spot, I'll leave it to you to figure out. But he says there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to cook it, even if it wasn't even a third cooked. Because if it's garuf for katum, this is the equivalent of that. Again, katum, by the way, you're covering the coals with ashes. That's again another sort of symbolic way of reminding you not to do it. And I assume that in some ways it does reduce if it reduces the heat. I'm not sure exactly. If you cover over the coals with ashes, that's going to reduce the heat, right? In some ways, it won't put it out. Okay. All right, v'chaniz kaleh. Okay, fine. Yud Zayin.
But again, in today's appliances, our ovens, the built-in wall ovens,
Right.
the only way you can program it for Shabbos, you have to program it in advance.
Right.
It says Sabbath on it, or
Right.
SAB, or whatever your
Right.
appliance is. And you know that you can't, it's not a knob turning, you have to it's.
Right, for the
digital.
inside of it, right. Right,
So-
unlike the stove top, right.
so There should be no problem.
So certainly with Shahia, we're not gonna have a problem at all with using an oven.
Okay.
And he's gonna make that point here, actually, in Yud Ches, he's gonna make this point.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So for Friday night, nothing to worry about here, folks. Yeah. Yud Zayin. B'samuch chutzala, next to the oven, but outside the oven. Hainu afilu im hayad saleres b'makom ahu. Even if it's so hot that in theory, it's a very important halachic measurement. And there are different estimates. What's the temperature of this? That if you were to put your hand there, you would pull it away because it's so hot that naturally you're going to, if you leave it there, you will get burned. So hayad, even if that place is so hot that outside the oven, again, it's getting so hot that yad saleres bo, it's your hand could get burned in that spot. That is still fine because again, it's outside the oven. We're not worried. Again, if something is going from before Shabbos into Shabbos, you cannot violate the oraisa. And the derabbanans here were all related to whether you may play with the fire. Okay, to this point. Okay, again, we're going to talk about the Chazara will be a little bit different. But for this point, we're really worried about playing with the fire. Okay, so if you have it outside the oven, presumably that's going to be a symbolic reminder that, of course, it's Shabbos and I'm not going to play with the fire. Yud Ches, mutar lahashos aleha. It is. Oh, sorry, we have to read this part in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so 1 second. Let's go back up on top, where for me it's 3 lines from the top of the page, where it says ve'im huska bekash o bigvava. Everyone see that up on top? There's a tiny little hay right before that line. Yeah, I feel like people are looking for it. Yeah, you got it. Okay, so ve'im huska bekash o bigvava. Muter lashos aleha afilu eina lo grufa velo ketuma. So if you have this the oven being fueled by kash is like I think is straw, and gvava I want to say is some sort of wool. I'm looking it up quickly here. Anyone can confirm that, Steve? I don't know if you're in your edition of the. Do they translate gvava for you? I believe it's a kind of wool. Just looking at the Jastrow dictionary on my phone. Here we go. Gevava. There's rakings here, a ball of clipped wool. Okay, so these are things, wool. It's clipped wool, a ball of clipped wool, a ball of clipped wool, it says here. Okay. And again, I believe that kash, in Torah, we talk about kash, that the Jews had to mikoshish kash latevin or something like that. It's straw. So muter lashos aleh afilu eina lo grufa velo ketuma. You're allowed to put it on before Shabbos in put it on top of an oven, not just on the side, but on top of the oven here. It says, even if the oven is not grufa or ketuma, you didn't sprinkle ashes or ketuma, or you didn't rake the coals here. You didn't rake the heat source over to the side. Perfectly fine. You don't need that. Go ahead. So what's going on here? Actually, before we read Yud Ches, let me explain what is going on. Why is this okay suddenly? If it was a different heat source, the coals was a problem. Here, what's the difference? Because when you heat straw, when you light straw on fire, it's gone. Coals stay around, and you could rake the coals. You could stoke them. You could play with them. Once the fire consumes the straw ceases to exist. And same with gvava, obviously, that's the assumption here, that it will cease to exist after it's fully burnt up. Right? With coal, you can start playing, get the fire to get a little bigger again. Here, that's not possible. And that's why this isn't something that's discussed. He's actually going to mention this in Yud Tes, but I wanted to give you that little heads up. Look at Yud Ches and Yud Tes. Yud Ches says, Mutar lahashos aleh, b'hu adem b'tocha. It's not just on top of the oven, it's in the oven. Totally fine. The keva de grufa damya, it's like grufa. By the very nature of using straw, it is like grufa. Because there's nothing left. After it's burnt, it's gone. You put it inside the oven before Shabbos starts. Mali tocha, mali al gaba. What's the difference? Inside, on top, there's no difference. I'm not going to play with the fire because the fire will have consumed it and it's gone. The fire is gone. How long will your heat source last? It depends how much you put in there. It can probably last for a long time. But the point is, stoking the straw won't really make much of a difference. The fire will just spread to it naturally, and once the straw is consumed, it's consumed. So there was no fear that you would adjust the fire. Okay, Yud Tes, afilu eina v'chulei. Even if it's not the grufa or ketuma, lefisha ein b'chashash chitui. We're not concerned. You're going to stoke the straw. Okay, you might do that with coal, but here we're not worried. Shemiyad shekale. Turn the page. Hashal haves, once the flame is gone, because it burned the straw. Kale gam hagacheles. So the heat source is also gone. The straw is gone, and so therefore there's no fear. Now, it's interesting here. I didn't look at the other comment here. I just noticed there was another comment here. Okay, we'll go back to that. But here he says in my edition here, "Bedin kiraim shel gaz shabizman." You don't have this in your edition, but he says here, "What about a gas oven shabizmanein?" A gas oven, and I think here he's describing. I don't know if he's describing the inside or the top, the stove top. We'll think about it as we read this. He says, "Das Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Eliashiv, two the major poskim in the previous century." I'm actually sure Rav Eliashiv only passed away a few years ago. Shenoheges bahen gzeras shema yechata. He said, no, by the gas oven we are worried shema yechata. Mishum hagdalas halahava hi peula kala. The raising of the flame or the decreasing of the flame, right, is very easy. You go like this on the dial. It's even worse than coals, because at least with coals you have to kind of get in. Here he says we can't tell you that our gas ovens are like kasher gvava. That we're not scared, right? What are you going to do? You're going to bring more straw and more wool. The whole reason you're not worried you're going to play with the fires. Come on, you're going to bring more straw and suddenly you're going to forget that it's Shabbos. That's not the fear. There you have to go. You got to get more straw from over there, from the straw pile. By the time you brought it, Shabbos. Somehow you'll realize it's Shabbos. Masha came, by the way, when you talk about just going like this, you could walk by, you see looking at the thing, and you just adjust it. Okay, not saying that we would all fall into that trap, but it's at least more a plausible fear. And so he says here, quoting from Russell Rav Nissen Karlitz, it's something we do all the time during the weekends when we cook. It's more like stoking the coals than it is to bring in new stuff from the outside, where you're gonna have to refuel the oven with more straw or more whatever it might be that you're gonna put underneath there, but that gets fully consumed, and the only way you can get new ones is by bringing from the outside. Anyway, so that's just he basically points out that we can't compare in terms of the type of oven. In terms of grufa and ketuma, we may have better technology, but that shuts down as Hinda was pointing out, shuts down the functionality of buttons. But at least by the way, with the stovetop, and we will talk about that with regards to a sort of a kadera blech, which is what people have over top of their stovetop. That's a little more tricky because it is very simple to make that mistake. Again, not saying that's something we would do, but you could see it a more realistic possibility, occasion from time to time that may occur. And yes, I know we pointed out last time, why don't we do this with electricity, I don't know if it was Sindhu who made the point last time or somebody else made the point that why don't we do this why don't we have such a gzeira with regards to the light switches? Why aren't we forced to put something on top of those? The other day there was no gzeira made about that. This food, the gzeira related to heating food, was made. That's the reality. That's that. Sometimes that's the simple explanation, even if it's not satisfying. Let's read the Rama now. Okay, so you're gonna have to go back 2 pages to go back 1 page to the Rama. He says here, "Shtei kiros hamat imos zo etzel zo." Okay, you have 2 kiras that they were built this way. This was how General Electric made it in those days. They were basically one unit with 2 kiras, one on the left side, one on the right side. Each one had 2 spots for pots. V'dofen shel cheres beinehem, and there was a earthenware wall as the divider. Ha'achas grufa ktuma. Before Shabbos, I prepare one of the ovens, grufa ktuma. I rake the coals, I cover them with ashes. Okay. V'ashniya ain't a grufa ktuma, and the second one didn't have this. So here's the question: can I use both sides? Or can I use the side that was garufa katum? I'll put it on top of it, but there's heat that is also emanating from the one that I didn't do grufa ktuma on. So he says here, muter lashos al grufa ktuma. I can, before Shabbos, place the pot on top of the kira that's grufa ktuma. And again, I'll add here, or inside. Okay. Afal pi shemosif hevel mishe'ena grufa ktuma. Even though the one that is that has not been properly prepared for Shabbos is adding heat. It's mosif hevel. It's adding more heat to what's going on next door. I don't think that they didn't share the same heat source. Because once you're garuf katum one, then it would be garuf katum both. They obviously had different heat sources. But the reality is, it's like a room where you have a lot of appliances on. It gets hot in there. And if you have them, smack against each other, then it's not crazy to say that there is some heat that is being added to the equation for the other side, the side that was garuf. So this is okay. The Rama says this is okay. Now, I have never seen a contraption like this.
The heat source on the second one is not lit, or it is?
They're both lit, but I raked the coals to the side, or I cover them with ashes on one side. No, that not the other side. The other side I can't use. I can use this side, even though it's the unprepared side is adding heat over to the other side. And you say, well, this is not practical. Yeah, it's not practical. But there is interesting here. It's interesting. I don't have this, but not everybody here has it. I've seen though, you have ovens that are on top of each other today. I don't know if side by side. I haven't seen side by side, but the double-decker ovens I have seen. And can you put something? Can you put something in the oven that's sort of properly prepared for Shabbos, and something that in the other oven, even though the other oven is on and it's blasting the heat, and some of the heat's going into the other, I don't think there'll be a problem. Obviously, here you see from the Rama's case, the Kira, it was not an issue. So if you have a double-decker oven and there's heat filtering in from one to the other, though I think they make them so well that there is probably very little, if any, heat that's transferring from one to the other. But in theory, if you have a poorly made one, you're fine. Okay. Sif katan chaf. Afal pisha mosif hevel perish bakira hagrufa. We're talking about in the oven that was properly prepared, that the coals were raked to the side. You may have thought that since it's connected to this other oven, that we would treat it like Eina Grufa. Kamash Malan. So this comes to teach us, we don't say this. And even on Shabbos, it's okay to return food back onto this kira. By the way, here, he's dafka using the word aleha. I think that tocha is going to be a problem. But here you are allowed to return it back up on top of the kira on Shabbos, even though it's connected to a heat source, which is not garuf hakoto. When it comes to chazara, there's no other way. It has to be garuf hakoto. There's no way you can return it to a heat source. Shahiyah, you can get away with it if it's fully cooked or third cooked according to the second opinion. When it comes to chazara, it doesn't matter if it's fully cooked. You're going to have a grufa uketuma on your heat source. So this, something to keep in mind. There are little differences between shahiyah. Again, that's the Friday night, putting it in or on before Shabbos into Shabbos versus the return of that food back onto a heat source on Shabbos. Okay, now we come to different kinds of ancient ovens. And I apologize. In some ways, this is not practical because their oven is not like our oven, as the Ramah is going to quote in a moment. So the next few moments are more for the lumdus than they are for the practicality of it. He says here, Vitanur, and this is all based on the Gemara. The Gemara has these different categories, so like a kira, a tanur, and a kofach. Okay, so a tanur is the structure as it was in that picture that Steve had sent. It looks like a kira, except it gets narrow at the top. And my father would always tell me, my father was telling me, the chemist and scientist, right? Heat rises, Nuri, heat rises. And that's why everything, in terms of how the house is, why is it hot up here and it's not as hot down here? The heat rises. So when you have a narrow top, the heat has nowhere to go. So the whole structure of the oven is going to be a much higher temperature in a tanur. And so we're going to see there's some different rules here. But tanur, afilu husak bekasha ugvava, even if the source, the heat source, is kasha and gvava, straw and the ball of wool, which we had a lot of leniencies about with regards to the kira. Asr afilu lismochlo, even to place it next to the tanur is a problem. Afilu ihu garuf fekatum, even if it's garuf fekatum, even if you had raked the coals to the side or you covered them with ash, not allowed. The Ramah adds in one little caveat, which is kolzman shayad seletis, as long as it's hot, where it could burn you, which is sort of what we generally think sort of as things are minimally cooking, heating up, at that temperature. But kol shekain she'aser lashhos besocho o al gam, and certainly you cannot do shahiyah, and inside of it or on top of it. You can't do smicha, of course you can't do shahiyah inside or on top. So what's going on here? Why is the tanur suddenly it's retreating? This suddenly everything's out off the table once you get to a tanur, not a kira. So the Mishnah Berurah says chaf aleph, the tanur hainu betanur shelahem asuyos kekira. Their tanurim were made like a kira, except ach mitoch sheksaros lamala, they were narrow on top, the rochav lamata, and wide on the bottom. Niklat chumo latocho tfei mikira. It got hotter as a result than the kira did. Lakach chmira bo yoser mikira. So they were more careful with this type of oven than the kira. Let's keep reading. Chav beis afilu im garuf, even if it's garuf. Mipnei she'agoref eno goref. Because if you were goref it, you raked it, it's not raked. What in the world could that why could that not help? So he writes here, Ella rov ha'esh atzma v'efshar shelo tishar nitzot echad. It's so hot. Again, this would also lend credence more to the definition that grufa means raking the coals out. Okay, because it says here, because it's so hot, it's impossible that there isn't some spark of heat that's left there. There's something there that you could still stoke, and that you could still take what's left and make it hot again. Okay, and since that's the case, the tanur shechumo rav, so hot in there, we are worried that you will stoke whatever the heat source is in there. You will kadeshi yivaru otam hanitzotos. So whatever sparks are left, you'll play around with them and try to reignite the fire It sounds like he's following the opinion of the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch is that even with kasha and gvava, it's not allowed. If even with garuf and katum. And that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehonatan, who is brought in the commentary of the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim, who was a Rishon in Spain. But according to the Rambam, Rambam read the Gemara and said, no. Kasha and Gevava is not a problem, even in the tanur, the hottest kind of oven, or a very hot kind of oven, so long as even if it's not garuf. Okay, kasha and gevava, they burn up. So you can't start saying you're going to stoke the coals. So Rambam didn't buy that. And the Ran himself and the kolbo, they thought that kasha and gevava is always fine, even in a tanur. The Mishnah Berurah here says, based on the fact that you have upon whom to rely, he says you can be lenient on in the case of using kasha and gevava, even in the tanur, this structure that will make it very hot. The point is, if it burns up, it burns up. What's the fear? Just because it's very hot doesn't mean that you're going to stoke you're more likely to stoke the coals. It has nothing to really do with the temperature here. Okay. And in fact, I'm just looking over here at the side. I just noticed this right now in my extra commentary. The kach on this whole topic, he says here, they say here, the kach bi'er madua ein ze nechshav kegaruf. We're saying, why is it not considered garuf when it's, according to that first opinion, when it's, you garuf it when you're not, what does it mean? It doesn't count? It says v'tama davar she'ein k'tima ma'ila b'tanur, and k'tima doesn't help, putting the ashes doesn't help in a tanur. Why? Shekeven shehevel hatanur rav, since it's so hot. That doesn't help us not do away with the concern that we're going to stoke the coals. The whole point here of putting the ashes on it so you don't burn the food, usually okay, I'm not sure what he means by that. This is what my eye was caught by. So it says the Igros Moshe says, Madua mo'ila k'tima b'kirayim shel gaz b'yamein. Why does k'tima help in a gas oven today? Our ovens can get hotter than anything that they had. You just turn the dial. The fire goes all 550. You could put it on, you could be very high. Because when it's very high in those days, right? Presumably, the fear was it was so hot that because of that, I'm not sure what the svar is exactly. You weren't going to remove your mind from stoking the coals. The fire is there. I'm going to play with this. It's burning, and it's burning very hot. Right, and maybe, in fact, you're actually playing with the fire for the opposite reason, because you want to maybe help make sure that your food doesn't burn. So you start playing with the fire, right? It's no problem. Shazohi derech habishul in a tanur, the very hot. That's how you would deal with things. You'd have to try to turn the heat down at a certain point. Masha'en came b'kirayim shel gas, by a gas oven. He says she'ein da derech klal levashel k'shekirayim mechuso b'pach. It's got a metal covering, anyways. And that's not how you do it. Right? You turn it onto it. You don't. We cook so precisely. We can turn our ovens to a temperature, exactly to a temperature. That wasn't how they cooked. They looked underneath. How's the fire? They kind of put their hand. How hot is it? They had to estimate everything. I don't know how they had recipes, by the way. How long at what temperature? They couldn't tell you that. Anyway, so it says, therefore, therefore, if you do grufa and ketuma in our kind of ovens, a gas oven, it's very different. That should count even in a tanur, like we have, which can get very hot. because we have much more control over how the heat, how hot it is, and and we have control over the heat source. Very, very good control over the heat source. Okay, let's go back into the Shulchan Aruch here. Or actually, we have more here. Oh, Chaf Gimel, sorry, Mishnah Berurah, Chaf Gimel, Shayad Saledes Bo, that it's so hot it could burn your hand. Afilu im ein hayad Saledes Bo, even if it's not so hot that it could burn your hand. Mutter lady, sorry, but if it's not as hot that it couldn't burn your hand, mutter leitem afilu al gabav, you could put it on top of this tanur, afilu b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos, such a low heat source. Even if you didn't do anything to the coals, it's just they've kind of burned out mostly, but they're very, 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 very low heat right now. That should be fine. Since the spot where the food is not, it's not yad saledes bo, it's not even close to cooking, it's giving off a little bit of heat. There, we're not worried that you're going to play with it since it's already struggling to get hot. By you putting it there in the first place, you understand that it's Shabbos. You're not playing with fire essentially at that point, literally and spiritually, or halachically. Okay, good. Chav Dalef with Kol Shekain, it's not going to be okay according to this opinion, the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, to do shehiyah in a tanur. This is only talking about if it's not cooked yet, fully cooked, again, according to the first opinion, or it is cooked, but its continuation of cooking will be good for it, like a soup. But if you have a grilled chicken, and the more you heat up the grilled chicken, you all and I all know, not good for the grilled chicken. There's a certain point where, there's a point of no return where it starts to dry out. Or if it's completely raw, right? That's when you throw the raw piece of meat in the cholent right before Shabbos. And it's not garuf v'kotum, that's going to be fine. Okay, so if it's fully cooked, again, we're not worried you're going to stoke the coals. If it's got something raw right before Shabbos starts, it's not going to be ready Friday night. It's only going to be ready Shabbos morning, and by then it'll be fully cooked by the morning. Not worried that you're going to play with the fire. Okay. Good. Let's go back up on top. Let's talk about another ancient oven, the kofach. The kofach, and actually the Shulchan Aruch here describes it. The kofach, shehu mekom shvisas keder achas. Unlike a tanur which had a spot for 2 pots, the kofach has a spot for 1 pot. It doesn't have the oven, the tanur shape where it's narrow. It's a mini kira. That seems to be how it. To my ears, that's how I picture it. Or sorry, that's how in my mind. That's how I picture it. If it were the fuel for the fire under the kofach is kash or gvava, the straw or the rubber, the woolen ball, the wool string, dino kakira. We treat it like a kira. All the halachos that we talk about a kira. When is it allowed? When do I have to have proof of ketuma? But we treat it like a kira, even though it's a mini kira. And again, presumably the heat will be high. It'll be hotter in there because it's a smaller, tighter space. But if it's begefes over eitzim, if it's using wood or the olive, or the gefes was the scraps of olives, the leftover scraps of olives, that apparently got very hot if you use them as a fuel for fire. So dino, and I guess that also it's left over, the scraps there, you could play with the scraps, unlike straw, which gets burned up. Dino ketanur, we treat the laws or follow the laws of a tanur, which are much more strict, as we just saw. So the kofach is a middle ground between the tanur and the kira. Depending on your heat source, you could go this way or that way. Let's take a look at Chavav and Chav Zayin. Chavav dino kekira, vafilo garaf esakash below kata. So even if you don't rake the kash, the straw, which again you're not really able to, below katam, you don't sprinkle ashes on it, it's fine. We treat it like a kira, and like a kash and gvava kira, you could do anything there, right? Remember we talked about just a few moments, 30 minutes ago. We said that you can do shehiyah even if on an oven with kash and gvava, a kira that's with kash and gvava, even if it's not Goro for Katan. Right? So same thing here. And he says, Chav Zayin, Dino Ketana, but if it's Gefes and Eitzim, wood or the olive scraps, so Shafilu Gora for Katam Asr, there, even if you do Guru for Ketuma, you're not allowed to do it, according to Shulchan Aruch's approach. Mishnah Berurah did quote some lenient opinions amongst the Rishonim and said you could rely on these. But according to the Shulchan Aruch, you have the opposite here. Bein Tocha, Bein Lagal, Bein Smicha. You can't do inside, out, on top, or even Smicha if the kofach is lit with gefes, is fueled with gefes and eitzim. So you have this kind of split psak with regards to the kofach. Okay. The perhaps most important line we read today comes now. The Rama adds in here, "V'hatanurim shalanu dinam kikira." Our ovens today are like a kira. That's what he says. To my knowledge, this is how we treat the ovens today also. And he even goes further here. Take a look at this. The Mishnah Berurah now brings it to our day and age. Because you see, when they were describing the ancient oven, there was a compartment underneath to put the fuel, and then you would put the food either into it from on top, if you chose to do that, or right on top. Right? So the heat, it's almost like a stove top, right? It has the stove top or down in. Chavches, tanurim shalanu. Shepiem min atzad. Our ovens, and already in those days, in the medieval period, the door to the oven was on the side, like we have today. Again, that wasn't their oven in the days of the Talmud. Our ovens are very wide compared to their ovens. Now, this is a little different from the medieval period to today. He says the heat in our ovens. I think he's talking. I don't know. Actually, Mishnah Berurah, Chafetz Chaim lived in the early 1900s, and he didn't have the kind of ovens that we have today either. I don't think we have to remember that too. They didn't have indoor, connected to your gas line. It wasn't the same thing. I don't know if they did, but when did the ovens become a fixture in the home and not become a communal oven where you would take your cholent? People would do that on Friday afternoon. You can see this described in many of the Rishonim. They would take their cholent to a communal oven. You'd put your pot in the oven and you'd leave it there, and you'd pick it up on Shabbos morning.
I saw that.
Tommy said he saw it in his own life.
As a toddler, I remember.
You're right. Okay, there you go. So again, the idea of having an oven in our home, I don't know.
They had oven in the house also, but I don't know, for some reason they took it over to the baker or whatever.
Probably because it was hard to keep the fuel on the whole Shabbos in a small oven, like people had, and whatever they, little contraption they had. So you took it to the communal oven too, because there they could keep the fire going, and it'll cook, with high heat the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he says here that the heat in our kira, in our ovens, is not so hot because it's wide, and therefore it's like a kira. It doesn't get super hot. Okay, it is wide. Our ovens are undoubtedly wider, but we can control the temperature a lot better than they could control the temperature. Even though they had the ability to add fuel to the fire there. So I don't know, because it's so wide. This halacha also comes into play. I'm remembering in Yoredea when it comes to if you're cooking meat and milk in the oven, the dairy and fleshik in the oven at the same time, or something like that. If it's very big, there are heterim to be able to cook it at the same time if it's covered, whatever. But you should learn Hilchos Bishul with me. Then you'll find all the kulas, all the kulas. But the size of an oven does come into play over there in that discussion as well. So if it's wider, presumably the heat, I think it just spreads more. You have less concentration of it. Again, we can control the heat in a very different way than even the Mishnah Berurah's time. Anyways, bottom line, today we do treat it as a kira. That is how the poskim treat it. He says here, "V'sefer Tiferes Shmuel, hevi b'shem Marshal, the Marshal, shecholek al zev sover deshovim heim ledina." Ayin shav al kolpanim betanur shel nachtorim b'shemasikim botarev v'chum orav tov lahachmer leduno ke tanur. Tiferes Shmuel brings the Marshal. I think it's Shlomo Luri. I'm not even sure. Who argues, and it says, no, our halachos are the same. The shavim heim ladina. right there. But so if it looks more like a tanur where it's narrow on the top, so then it's we should treat ours as a tanur. I don't think this is the general psak today. Anyway, it says nevertheless a tanur shel machtomim, certainly for the baker, he says here, has an oven which can get very hot and is always being fueled. He says best to be machmir, to treat it like a tanur of the time of the Gemara. I'm not even sure that's. Look at this. I didn't even prepare this part. Over here he says, the Chazon Ish says, yesh lahakel ap tanur shel machtomim, even if you go to the bakery or the communal oven, fine. And then they add in here, but tanuri chashmal, electric ovens like we have today, right? You control it with the dial. The Igros Moshe Feinstein wrote, Dinam Kekira. We treat it like a kira. Rav Nissen Karlitz, the host is Levar Shmuel Vad, Masha Kasa B'Shavar Shechaluk Dinam, we didn't, Tanur Shvi Mechazal. Not just that it was the door was Hashpitchem, it's not that the door was on the side. Is on the side, and that's how it's different. Chaluki and Gam, it's also different because Bekach She'enam Shomrim et Chumam. Sharei Kishemechavim Otam Mitztanim Maher. Masha'en kain b'tanur shebei chazal. Sha'af la'achar hasar hagachal mehem hayu hatanur shomrim et chum b'meshach zman. Apparently, they claim that our ovens, when you turn them off, the heat dissipates very quickly. There are a lot of vents out of our ovens. They didn't have vents, and therefore, even though maybe this explains that if you rake the coals completely out, this gives some credence. The heat would stay. Because I guess you could close the fuel source. There's probably a little hole at the bottom. You could probably close that, and there was no vent, so you probably could put. You probably could keep the heat a lot longer in that space, and therefore he claims it dissipates less. Therefore, it's not like and so therefore, since our heat dissipates, which is true by the way, we have vents built into our ovens. Otherwise, it would be dangerous, I believe, if there's no vent. Therefore, we treat it like that's another reason to say it's like a kiva. Okay. So the bottom line is, I told you the poskim today treat our ovens like kivas. So the halachas that really are going to matter to us. So what does the Gemara say? What did the Shulchan Aruch say? What do the Ramah say about a kiva? Okay, so we've seen one opinion about what we say about a kiva. We're going to pause here. The next week we will talk what happens if you make a mistake. This is relevant to both. The second opinion, which we haven't gotten to yet, the Yesh Omim of Rashi and Tosfos. This next part is relevant to that as well. What if you make a mistake? You do shahiyah improperly. So according to the Shulchan Aruch's first opinion, it's easier to see how this happens. It wasn't fully cooked. And I wasn't going. I forgot to do group for tumor. So then it's an issue. We're going to see what happens if I make a mistake. Can I use the food? Can I not use the food? We'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about then next week what happens if you. Derech Agav, we talked. What happens if you make a mistake with Chazara? Either we didn't talk about the laws of Chazara yet. What happens if you make a mistake with the laws of Chazara? Can I use the food? Can I not use the food, etc.? And then that will bring us to the Yesh Owen, the second opinion, which is going to be very important, because once we fully understand that, then we'll truly understand what our practice is, because the Ramah says that we really follow the second opinion of Rashi and Tosfos. Okay, questions before we go? Millions of them, I know. Hopefully this is clear. I'm trying my very best to be very clear. A lot of, as opposed to some of the other simanim we learned, this is very technical. A lot of, again, new terminology. I made a sheet. I'll try to take a picture of this so as you are on, been watching on Zoom. Just some basic terms, just to have it near you. I'm happy to take a picture and send it to everybody.
That would be good. Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure, no problem. And we'll continue next week. I hope everyone has a great day, great week, and stay well.
Thank you, Rabbi Yeshua.
Thank you, Yeshua.